The following is a sermon from Grace City Church in Denver, Colorado. Grace City exists to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ. For more info, visit gracecitydenver.com.
Psalm 49, Why should I fear in times of trouble? To the choir master, a psalm of the sons of Korah. Hear this, all peoples, give ear, all inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak wisdom, the meditation of my heart shall be understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb, I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. Why should I fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me, those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches? Truly no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit. For he sees that even the wise die. The fool and the stupid alike must perish and leave their wealth to others. Their graves are their homes forever, their dwelling places to all generations, though they called lands by their own names. Man in his pomp will not remain, he is like the beasts that perish. This is the path of those who have foolish confidence, yet after them people approve of their boasts. Like sheep they are appointed for Sheol, death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol, with no place to dwell. But God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases. For when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him. For though while he lives, he counts himself blessed. And though you get praise when you do well for yourself, his soul will go to the generation of his fathers, who will never again see light. Man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beasts that perish. This is the word of the Lord.
It's been said money can't buy happiness, but it certainly helps. There are 1,000 variations of that. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy ice cream, which is kind of the same. Deep down, I know that just simply having more money or more money at my disposal is not going to make me a deeper, more kind of intrinsically happy person. It's not going to bring me lasting contentment. But you would also agree with the other half of this statement that it doesn't hurt to have money because I can buy things that I enjoy. I can go on experiences that I enjoy, or some of you that are, and I don't mean hoarders, but just you're planning for the future, and you would say that having money in an account somewhere gives you a form of happiness, which is just like a safety net, a security. Like I know it's there, and I have less worry and less anxiety in my life, because if something were to go sideways, or I was in a car accident or something and needed to buy a new car, I'm setting aside for that. Well, today's psalm invites us to examine what we believe about money. And it's a really interesting psalm because it sounds a lot like a proverb, doesn't it? Like as he was reading through that, it doesn't sound like the general psalm where it's like, look at this attribute of God and let's extol him and praise him together because he is king. It's more like, here's a thought about money, and here's something you need to consider about possessions. And it's that kind of thing, which is, it's this far right logo, which is the heart, that our hearts get wisdom out of the word of God. So it's something called a wisdom psalm, or a psalm of wisdom is this particular type. So before we leave the Psalms for the next 9 months, and we're going to be doing a couple vision sermons next week and the week following of like, what is God leading us into this fall and beyond? Then we're going to go back to our series in John. So we're leaving Psalms for 9 months until, Lord willing, next June. And God has one more thing for you here from Psalm 49. And here's the big idea. Don't live for something that dies with you. Don't live for anything that dies with you. And here's how we're going to look at this. There's an intro, verses 1 to 4. Then there's a key question, and then 2 key perspectives, and a key contrast, and then I'll give you some gospel applications before we close this morning. So notice verses 1 through 4 are basically just an introduction. This is not a main point of the psalm, but 2 of the 3 imperatives of the entire psalm are in the first 2 lines. So he's saying, hear this, all peoples. Give ear, all inhabitants of the world. He's just saying the same thing 2 different ways. But then he says both low and high, both rich and poor together. And so what I want you to notice is this is not a psalm for a particular race or class of people. He's saying everybody, which is even if you're a follower of Yahweh in the Old Covenant, or you're a pagan, you're a polytheist, you worship many gods, God's wisdom is still true for you, and I'm calling you to pay attention to what I'm about to say. That's kind of the beginning of this introduction. I think that's important because the poor tend to look at the rich and say, those are the people that sin with money. Because look how materialistic they are. So they've accumulated all this stuff. And where Jesus says, don't lay up treasures on earth, look at all this stuff that they have. So they're the disobedient ones when it comes to money. They're greedy. They're opportunistic. They use people to get more money. And the rich have a tendency, if you don't know, to look at the poor and say, those are the people that struggle with money. Like, they're greedy, they're envious because they don't have. And the psalmist is just being like, let's not do that. The people who are unlike me are the people with the problem with money stuff. Let's just admit this is universal wisdom. So he's cutting through all that class warfare, and he goes on. Verses 3 and 4, my mouth shall speak wisdom. The meditation of my heart shall be understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb. I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. So this is a song. It's a weird thing to sing about. We don't kind of have these habits today of like, let's sing a song about how people struggle with money and possessions. But nevertheless, this is what Old Covenant people did, okay? But he's saying, pay attention to this universal truth that I'm about to share, and you will be wiser if you grasp this. And that leads us immediately then to the key question, verses 5 and 6. And he's going to ask it a couple different ways. Why should I fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me? Those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches. Now, it's kind of a run-on sentence, so let's just break it down. What's bothering him? Like, what's he saying? Why should I fear? What's the key question here? Really, 2 things are bothering him. They're related to each other. First of all, he says, I'm experiencing trouble, which is literally the word like misery, because the wealthy have cheated, they've defrauded me of something. And the root word there has to do with deception. So he's bothered by the deception and the theft of the wealthy. But notice he's also bothered by the boastful self-confidence. Just like they have stuff, and so they're not worried, and they're bragging in front of other people that, like, we have something that you don't have. We're more powerful. We have better status. We have more friendships as a result. And I'm sure that you can see that these are still relevant frustrations today. Like the first part of that, I'm still constantly hearing, even on the news, how like uber wealthy Americans are just manipulating and using, and they're really who's in control of politics in America. And so this idea of like they're deceptive and they're using their money to get what they want, and it's not good for everyone, it's just good for them. Or you could see that kind of deception, that kind of taking, when this, again, happens all the time, that a politician or a CEO gives himself a raise while he's like, we have to make corporate cuts. Or we have to lay off all these city employees because we have money for me, but not for thee. And you can see how someone would get very frustrated at that. Like, what are you talking? Like, why don't we more equitably distribute money and possessions between people who are working hard at this level and people who are working hard at this level and people who are working hard at this level? And it's just not fair, and I'm getting worked up over this. And then this idea of boastful wealth, and again, you could see this all kinds of times. It's the guy that walks into the restaurant and drops a few $1,000s really loudly for like a bottle of wine. Or the person that is boasting of like, we're going to take the private jet to this 6-figure vacation in Aspen. Or the woman who goes to, Cherry Creek Mall with her entourage and is just buying all this like new wardrobe and new jewelry and new perfume and just dropping thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and walking around with their bags. And you're like, there's a boastfulness to that. Or you see those people who are always courtside at the Nuggets games or whoever you follow. or they're always in the best box seats. And you're like, I can't even afford to go to a game. And you're always in the best place. And there can be, again, an anxiety. You can feel your blood pressure go up of like, God, this isn't fair. Like, I'm serving you, and I love you, and I worship you, and I trust you. And why is it so easy for them? And they're not even honest with the way they handle money. And so as we come to this key question here, where he basically says, why should I fear when I see stuff like this? And I want you to understand the fear here doesn't mean, why am I scared? Or why am I afraid? That is one translation, obviously, of the word. But the idea here is more like, why am I worked up? Why am I angsty? Why am I agitated? Why does this bother me so much when I see the injustice of how wealth is distributed, how certain people have money and possessions and power and status, and certain other people don't, and there's really no rhyme or reason to why that works out that way when I'm trying to follow God? Now, that's the key question. Why am I anxious about that? Why am I frustrated about that? And I want you to notice with the rest of the psalm how the writer is going to answer his own question, but he doesn't just go right at it and answer it and say, well, here's why I'm afraid. Here's why I'm angsty about that. He actually instead is going to reframe his mind, or reframe his mindset now with two key perspectives. You'll hear a lot of wisdom in this. Very basic stuff, but very helpful stuff. So starting now in verse 7, here's the first perspective. He says, truly, no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit or the grave. So the first perspective is simply the reminder that money can't buy life. Money cannot buy life. That's what he's saying. Now, he's using the word ransom. And we know a ransom is basically the amount of money that's required as a payment to secure the release of someone or something from some kind of confinement or imprisonment. So back in this day when this was written, and the world was full of slavery, but a lot of those people could either ransom their own life or ransom the life of a family member or a friend or an acquaintance. The idea of an owner of slaves basically saying, for a certain price, you can redeem or ransom the life of a slave and they will have their freedom, like manumission. So that may be what they're thinking of in the context of ransom is like, how do you buy your freedom? And what he's saying is, you can't buy freedom from death or the grave, which ultimately is coming. Our psalm says there is no ransom. There is no amount of money you can pay God to preserve your own life or to redeem the life of another. I would use this verse with Catholics who believe in like purchasing indulgences to free someone from purgatory. What he's saying is you can't do that. Your money that you're putting in the offering that's going to the church is not liberating people from what their sin deserves. That's not how you get the freedom, in other words, is what he's saying. I want that to sink in. The bigger idea, money can't buy life. Because we're a culture, Western cultures spend a lot of our free time and a lot of our money and our resources of like, well, if I eat a certain diet and I take these supplements and I have this certain exercise regimen that I'm part of this club that costs a lot of money, we think like, well, I'll be able to live longer and a higher quality of life. And I want you to hear me. I'm not disputing that. I'm not just saying that you can't extend your life and have a greater quality of life by making healthy, wise choices instead of just eating insanely bad stuff for you and laying on the couch and never moving your body and spending money on that. So you are a steward of the one life that God has given you, and I'm not discouraging you from stewarding your life well, which involves money and resources being invested for your staying power to continue to serve God on this side. The simple idea is when death comes in God's time and God's providence, there's no amount of money you can give to God to say, can I live longer? You know, Voltaire, the famous French philosopher and writer, on his deathbed, turns to his doctor and says, I will give you half of all I possess if you will give me 6 months more of life. And it's that sort of thing that the psalmist is saying, understand wisdom. There's nothing you can do. By the way, God owns it in the first place. You are a steward of it. You can't just say, well, I'll give you all my money. Can I live longer now? That's the first principle. Money can't buy life. Going on, verse 10, for he sees, he's continuing to talk about the man who's getting wisdom. For he sees that even the wise die, the fool and the stupid alike must perish and leave their wealth to others. Their graves are their homes forever, their dwelling places to all generations, though they called lands by their own names. Man in his pomp will not remain. He is like the beasts that perish. Now jump to verse 16. Be not afraid when a man becomes rich, when the glory of his house increases, for when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him. So here's the second key perspective. If the first one is money can't buy you life, the second key perspective of this psalm is, and you can't take your money with you. That's what all these verses are saying. One simple principle. You can't take your money with you. And this is interesting in a period of time where many of the kings of the various kingdoms, and the pharaohs, certainly, which you probably studied in some kind of world history class, they were buried with a massive amount of treasure. Okay? Now, how do we know that? It's because years later we do excavation and we're like, well, there's the treasure and there's the corpse. So did they take the wealth with them to the afterlife? No, it's sitting right there. And that's how we know that they pulled this stunt. So they didn't take it with them. And they literally had an illustration right in front of their faces of like, your wealth was just wasted in the ground. It wasn't invested. It wasn't used for the benefit of anyone else. It was just buried with you, and it stayed there, and you went on to the afterlife. It's been said there's no U-Haul trailers behind hearses. Like, you ever see that? A hearse, like we're driving from the memorial service to the cemetery, and you see like it's pulling a U-Haul trailer of all the stuff that they're going to take to the afterlife. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Why? Because in more colloquial terms, you can't take it with you. And that's what the psalmist is saying. Really basic idea, but whatever wealth, whatever possessions, whatever power, whatever status you had in this life is not going with you into the next. And let me just break that down for a moment. First of all, it's not just that you can't take your stuff with you. Notice verse 10, you will leave your wealth to others. And his idea is no matter how hard you worked, no matter how good of a steward you were with your personal finances, the moment you die, it's not just that you can't take it, it's you've left it all behind and now someone else is going to use it. And by the way, I'll let you in on a dirty little secret. Even with your family, when you pass, your family's going to want your money, okay, that you leave, because it's money. You know, they can do whatever with it. Your family's probably going to want a few of your possessions that genuinely have like intrinsic value to them. And they may want a few of your possessions that have sentimental value to them. But do you know most of the stuff that you've accumulated, your kids are going to look at each other and be like, do you want that? I don't want this. Do you want this? I don't want it either. And they're going to get rid of all your stuff because it doesn't have the meaning to them as it had to you when you were collecting it and stockpiling it and saying, oh, I can't get rid of any of this. This is all very important to me. And that's part of what he's saying here. You will leave your wealth to others. Secondly, kind of a second corollary is notice your name will be replaced and forgotten. This is verse 11, which I need to explain. I don't think verse 11, we read it in the ESV, their graves, are their homes forever. Well, the word translated graves, that's a very unusual translation of the word that's there. The idea of a grave, the idea of this Hebrew word is actually like an inner part, like an inner sanctum of something. So you can see how they would say like, well, in death, like that grave, that pit, that place where your body is placed is kind of like that inner sanctum of something. But I think a better translation here, because of how this word is generally used in the Hebrew Bible, would be something like this. He's not talking about a grave. He's talking about your inward parts or your inward thoughts. And so it's something like this. The writer's saying their inward thought was that their home would last forever, but they didn't. They called lands by their own names, but their names have been forgotten and replaced. In the modern world, when you buy, whether it's a car or definitely like a townhouse or a condominium or a single-family home, there's this thing called a title, and your name goes on that title, and that represents, it's a healthy thing of like where, our guests were saying like, where's the back of your property line? How do you know that you're not just like trespassing onto the golf course? It's a good question. And so we have these things called titles that kind of mark out the boundaries of your property and then put your name on it and say, this is mine versus this is yours. In the ancient world, whole kingdoms and lands and cities and monuments were always named after the people that conquered them or ruled them. And then those same lands are conquered again and renamed over and over again. We even talked about last week how, you go back to the early chapters of Genesis and you have Melchizedek, king of Salem. And then Salem becomes Jebus because the Jebusites live there and they're like, let's put our name on it. And then it becomes something else and becomes something else and something else. And finally it's called Jerusalem. And not even all the people in the world today call Jerusalem, Jerusalem, because they want to put their own claim on it. But what he's saying in the second corollary, their inward thought is that your home would last forever, and it didn't. You called your land by your name. Someone else came after your death and renamed it after them. And someone will come after them and rename it after them. One of my favorite kind of satirical short poems is this poem, Ozymandias by Percy B. Shelley. Some of you know this. The idea is like there's this traveler trudging across the desert. He's in the middle of nowhere, just surrounded by vast expanses of heat and sand. Nothing's there. And he comes across this stone pedestal with these trunk of some legs, and then there's something broken and in the sand over here, and he goes to examine it, and it's the furrowed, stern, angry brow, the face of a man. He's looking at this pedestal buried in sand, and it says, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." See what he's doing? Ozymandias, great, powerful, I will build a monument to myself with my name, and you all will fear me and serve me. And now it's one traveler in the middle of nowhere. His kingdom's gone. His name's gone. Nobody cares. He's buried, gone, lost forever. And that also demonstrates this third corollary then in the psalm. Not only is your money gone and left to someone else, your possessions are gone and left to someone else, your name passes. People forget who you were. But he says your status dies with you. Verse 12, man in his pomp will not remain. Verse 17, his glory will not go down after him. Verse 20, man in his pomp, yet without understanding, is like the beasts that perish. And this really struck me when I was touring Rome a couple months ago and walking around and just remembering what I'd learned from world history and from Roman mythology in a Greek mythology class. And you're looking at these different names inscribed on different things that are now broken down and lost. And it's like, look at these ancient ruins of the imperial Caesars that are progressively, each one after another, conquering the known world and saying all roads lead to Rome, and I am the imperial Caesar. All will bow before me. All will serve me. And as I'm there in the city, I'm thinking about these different Caesars. Okay, where is Julius Caesar buried? You can kind of find his little place in the Forum kind of area. This is in the center, and to the left, this is the mausoleum of Caesar Augustus. So this is the founder of Rome. This is like Caesar Augustus or Octavian, okay? So I'm like, I need to seek out this place. Where is this mausoleum? I'm sure it's amazing. I'm there. This is 10 o'clock in the morning. Like, do you notice anything? You're like, I notice lots of things. I'm supposed to guess what you're thinking in a way. But so in the center, that's kind of zoomed in. To the left, there's this big, long plaza that goes down to the front of the mausoleum. This picture on the far right is just at the base of that, turning around and looking back up the steps where everyone comes from to visit the mausoleum. And what do you notice? No one's there. This is the tomb of Caesar Augustus, the founder of Rome. And no one gives a rip. Do you think that you are more powerful than him? Do you think that you have more acclaim and status and wealth and possessions than Caesar Augustus? None of us will even come close. And the psalmist is like, why are you living for things that you will die, and in generations, like they're not even venerating this place. Like at least this guy, like nobody knows him, obviously, but at least the guy founded the city where we all live. Nobody cares. And the psalmist is saying, if that's what you're living for, nobody cares. And remember what we're talking about. The writer is saying, why am I so agitated? Why am I so angsty about the prosperity and the power and the pomp of other people, especially dishonest, unjust people? Why am I worked up about their boasting when I look at my life and again I'm like, God, I'm trying to do well and I can't get ahead financially maybe. Or there are unjust losses that I'm suffering because other people's bad choices are impacting me. And he's like, why are you so worked up over that? You can't buy life with your money, your power, your status, and you can't take any of that with you where you're going. So why do you care that much? By the way, it's interesting. I think Jesus was probably riffing off of Psalm 49 when in his ministry he told the parable of the rich fool. Do you remember this? Where he says this rich man is accumulating all these crops and all these lands and all these barns and places to store his stuff. And one day he looks around, he's genuinely sad. What's he sad about? He's like, I've acquired so much land and so many crops that I'm harvesting. I'm going to have to tear down my barns and build bigger barns just to store my stuff. Well, and the ironic thing there is like in the ancient world without refrigeration, you would take that stuff to market and you would sell it because it's a perishable item. You would do something with it where, yes, you're making money off it honorably, but you're benefiting the lives of other people. But he's like, no benefit to other people. I'm going to keep it for myself. I'm going to hoard it so that I accumulate more wealth for me. And at the end of that parable, Jesus says this, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? And do you hear the two principles of Psalm 49? This night your soul is required of you. In other words, your money can't buy you life. I'm taking your life tonight. Now, all this stuff that you've hoarded and accumulated to make a name for yourself, whose will it be? And you probably say, well, I don't know. Yeah. Somebody that you don't care about and that doesn't care about you is about to dispose of all your wealth in the way that they want to. So Jesus is saying, Psalm 49, you going to live for that? So that's the two key principles. Now look at the key contrast with me starting in verse 13. This is the path of those who have foolish confidence. Yet after them people approve of their boasts. Like sheep, they are appointed for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd, and the upright shall rule over them in the morning. Their form, and that's the idea of an image or an idol. So I want you to understand, grasp that. Their form shall be consumed in Sheol with no place to dwell, but God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. Now, just so you know, Sheol is the place of the dead. So sometimes it's a synonym for grave, and sometimes it's more like an element of the ongoing afterlife. Okay, either way, he's saying, okay, you who live for that wealth and possessions and status, you are going to the grave. You are going to the afterlife. And the main point is clear enough. The foolish trust in money and perish. The upright trust in God and reign with him forever. Okay, take a moment with just each of those. The foolish versus the upright. Again, the foolish trust in money and perish. So he continues on, verse 19. His soul, the soul of the foolish, will go to the generation of his fathers who will never again see light. So let me put it like this. If you trust in money, if you trust in possessions, you will ultimately lose both your idol and your soul. Let me repeat that. If you trust in money or possessions, you will lose both your idol, the thing that you serve, and your soul. If you love money, you put confidence in money, you essentially worship money, understand this, you will forever be separated from your God. You think in the afterlife that money will serve you? Do you think you'll serve that money? You see what I mean when I say you'll be separated from your God, from your idol, from the form of the thing that you worship inherently, functionally now? And you could fill in possession. If you're living for possession, you're like, I don't live for money, I just have stuff. Okay, same thing. If you're living for possessions, you will be forever separated from your God. If you live for status, you'll be forever separated from your God. If you live for power and the accumulation of controlling other people and having more influence, you'll be forever separated from your God, and you'll lose your soul. But positively, and for your encouragement, this psalm says, the upright trust in God and reign with him forever. So notice, though those who love money and possessions will never again see light, it says there is a morning, there's a sunrise for those who trust in God that comes after the night of death. This is an Old Testament hint of a resurrection. If there's a night and the wicked are never getting up from that night, but there's a morning that comes for the righteous who are following God and putting their trust in Yahweh, this is a hint of the resurrection. There's something on the other side of death. What is it? And how does it happen? Well, look at verse 15. After earlier saying, no man can ransom his own life, and no one can ransom the life of another, verse 15, but God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. And I want you to mark, as I've done in my Bible, those two words, but God. He's saying, you were on the way to death, but God. Money can't buy life, but God. We've all used money and power and status in negative ways, sinful ways, but God. You and I cannot purchase freedom from sin, from death, from judgment on our own for ourselves or for our family and friends, but God. You see how important those two words, but God can do the very thing that none of us can do for ourselves or for one another. But God what? But God has ransomed our souls, which literally means, but God has paid the price that's required for the liberation of you from something. And that something is the death and the separation from God. And he says, let me pay. I'm God of gods. I own everything. Let me pay with my life. And that's what we'll come to in a few moments, is this table. We're reminded that the ransom price was the life of the king. And he says, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you, and this was the price of your ransom. So instead of following wealth and serving wealth and money and possessions and status and power and all those things and climbing the corporate ladder and just thinking, if I could just get to this rung and have these people under me, and I don't even mean like you want to control them, but just like, now I'm a somebody. Now I have an identity. God is encouraging you not to find your identity in those things. Can I show you one more fascinating contrast here? Psalm 49, verse 14, to paraphrase it, the psalmist is saying, death is my shepherd, I lack everything. Death is my shepherd, I lack everything. Do you hear how that's the exact opposite of Psalm 23, verse 1? The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Basically, if you're serving money, if you're serving possessions, then money and possessions are not your shepherd. Death is. And by the way, it'll never be enough. I want more. I need more. People that tell themselves, if I could just get to this level of status in my company, I would be content forever just to be here. It doesn't usually work that way, does it? You get here, and then you want to be here. And then you're like, I'm starting to be a somebody. Now I got 6 direct reports instead of 2. Sure would be nice to have 30 direct reports. And we're doing this with money. And we're doing this with status symbols of clothing and cars and homes and neighborhoods and all these, like, am I part of this club, or am I part of this group, or am I associated with these people? And we're climbing, and it's relentless and it's exhausting, and we're angsty because of it, because it will never, ever, ever be enough. And God is saying, I'm enough. I will always be enough. If the Lord is your shepherd, you will not want. If money is your shepherd, then actually death is your shepherd, and you will always want. That's the contrast. Now, let's go to a couple applications here in closing. All right, number 1, do not envy, fear, or idolize the wealthy. Do not envy them. Do not fear them. Do not idolize them. By the way, some ways that we fear and idolize is that we use them to get what we want from them. And I know it's a temptation. We see what other people have. Again, for some of you, it may be just money, like piles of money in the bank or whatever, or a status symbol, or a certain amount of power, a certain amount of leverage, a certain amount of autonomy or agency over their life and other people. And we're like, I idolize that. I want that so badly for myself. And it's a temptation. And this psalm is a reminder, you've got to continually recalibrate your perspective. It's not just like, okay, fine, I don't care about money. I'm not gonna pursue money. You know, maybe I'll just quit my job and go be a hermit. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. And there's nothing wrong with accumulating money and wealth. It's about how you're thinking about the money and the wealth and the possessions that you are accumulating. How am I using those for the glory of God and the joy of other people instead of just being a hoarder, being a selfish, proud, arrogant, boastful, or very, very tight-fisted and scared and nervous all the time kind of person? You know, we sang the song this morning. I actually didn't know we were going to sing this, so how cool is this? But it has this phrase, if I have you, I have everything. But without you, I have nothing. You know, and if I ask for a show of hands, like, how many of you did not sing that this morning because you're like, that's a little disingenuous to how I actually live? No, we just all sing it like, if I have you, I've got everything. And without you, I have nothing. We're like, without you, and this, and this, and this other thing over here, which is kind of no big deal, but I like you plus all this stuff, I have everything. And without you, and functionally, we're like, without you, if I still have this other stuff, I have almost everything. And that is not the perspective of Scripture. It literally is, if I have you, that's where all of life is at now and forever. If I don't have you, and I've accumulated wealth and possessions and status and power and all of that, I have nothing that I can take with me, nothing that can buy me true life. And it's like you have a giant diamond ring on your finger that says, I am loved by the King of Kings. And you see this person over here, and they're holding a fresh-cut bouquet of weeds. And you're like, I need weeds too. Look at the weeds. The weeds are beautiful. There's so many things you can do with weeds on this side. He's like, they're already cut. They're dying. They're weeds. And you see what I mean about we need a complete shift of perspective to really believe I've got the diamond ring on my finger that says I am loved by the King of Kings now and forever. So I don't care about weeds. If I get weeds, great. It's not even that great. They're weeds. So do not envy, fear, or idolize the wealthy. Secondly, trust in God, not money, prosperity, or status. And by trust, I just mean put your confidence in functionally. It's easy to default to trust in money. I feel that way sometimes. You're looking at an account, and I'm like, hey, is anything coming in? I see what's going out. Is something coming in? Because I'm starting to get nervous. I've got bills to pay. And some of you may feel the same way. But to say my trust is not that account that I can pull up on my phone and look at and be like, what's coming and going? My trust is there. It's like, no, I trust God. I'm going to continue to honor him tomorrow with my work and with my rest and a balanced life that honors him. I'm not going to put my functional trust in this. Money can buy that safety net. This is where I started. Money is not happiness, but it sure helps, right? But money can't buy you the truest form of life. This is Jesus back at the parable of the rich fool where he says, one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. George Lorimer, who used to be the editor, or at least a contributor to the Saturday Evening Post, once wrote this: it's good to have money and the things that money can buy, but it's good, too, to check up once in a while and make sure that you haven't lost the things that money can't buy. And that's a big part of this psalm of wisdom. He's not rebuking money per se or possessions per se. It's good to have those things. It's also better to have the things that money can't buy and to put your functional trust in God. And then finally, I would just exhort each of you, find ways to invest your resources in that which endures for God's glory. You know, where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, do not lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt it, eat it, devour it, thieves break in and steal it. But lay up your treasures in heaven where none of those things are happening. And he's not saying it's wrong to have things. He's just saying if that's what you're living for, again, you're living for not only something that you can't take with you, but it's something that someone could come along and steal out of your hand. Or an animal could eat it, or it could burn to the ground. And if that's where your functional trust is and it can disappear that easily, you need to shift what you're trusting in. So I say invest in resources which endure for God's glory. You know, part of that is just taking some of your money every month and saying, Lord, I want to gladly invest in your gospel mission. And I'm not going to think of this like I'm tithing or giving, kicking and screaming, but it's like it is a joy to release a % of that which you've blessed me with so that it goes directly into mission, making disciples of people around the world. You know, see Kaylin come here and with Kate the other week and say, this is, you know, we're seeing people born again in Taiwan, and the Ecuador mission team to come back and say, we had all these professions of faith because of the investment in medical gear and sending a team down there to share the hope of Jesus in these remote Amazonian villages of people that many of them have never heard this story. I mean, you see how you're sending that ahead. You can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead of you. That's another way to think. There's not a U-Haul behind your hearse, but you can send it ahead of you. Like, this is going to be there when I get there because I've invested in the kingdom. I'm invested in things that last forever. You can do this by teaching the next generation. Instead of saying, just living for me, I'm going to invest in a younger person, a younger generation, and bring them along in their walk with God. But thinking about that whole part of your life that you're like, it's still out there. And I just want to close with this illustration. This is a 100-foot extension cord. I want you to think of the plug. It's probably more like 2 inches, but just pretend the plug is 1 inch. If the plug, 1 inch of this 100-foot extension cord, if that is 75 years of your earthly life, the remaining 100 feet, I'm not a math guy, okay, I'm a Bible guy, but I think it's 90,000 years. 75 years? 90,000 years. So it would take 11 of these to get to 1,000,000 years. You're not going to live for 1,000,000 years somewhere, family. You're going to live forever, okay? And you're investing in this. And you're like, this is all there is. I've got to make the most. I got my one shot, got to accumulate, I got to climb the ladder. And it's like, God is like, what about all of this? What are you doing with all of this? You can invest in all of this. You can send it there forever for God's glory and for the joy of the nations. You can invest in all of that. And that's what the psalmist is saying. Very simply, don't live for something that dies with you. Live for something that endures forever and brings joy and flourishing to your neighbors and glory to God.
You just listened to a recording of a sermon from Grace City Church in Denver, Colorado. We hope you can join us in person soon. Thanks for listening. The Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.